On Hinduism. The Swami was constantly preoccupied with the thought of Hinduism as a whole, and this fact found recurring expression in references to Vaishnavism. As a sannyasin, his own imagination was perhaps dominated by the conceptions of Shiva, but Vaishnavism offered him a subject of perpetual interest and analysis. The thing he knew by experience was the truth of the doctrine of Advaita. The symbols under which he would seek to convey this were the monastic ideal and the worship of the terrible. But these were truths for heroes. By their means, one might gather an army. The bulk of mankind would always think of God as a divine providence, a tender preserver, and the question of questions was how to deepen the popular knowledge of the connection between this type of belief and the highest philosophy. With regard to the West, indeed, the bridges had actually to be built. Advaita had to be explained and preached. But in India, all this had been done long ago. The facts were universally admitted. It was only necessary to renew realization, to remind the nation of the interrelation of all parts of its own faith, and to go again and again over the ground in order to see that no weak point remained in the argument by which Vaishnavism was demonstrated to be as essential to the highest philosophy as that philosophy was acknowledged to be to it. The Sankhya philosophy. Thus he loved to dwell on the spectacle of the historical emergence of Hinduism. He sought constantly for the great force behind the evolution of any given phenomena. Where was the thinker behind the founder of a religion? And where, on the other hand, was the heart to complete the thought? Buddha had received his philosophy of the 5 categories, form and feeling, sensation, motion and knowledge, from Kapila. But Buddha had brought the love that made the philosophy alive. Of no one of these, Kapila had said, can anything be declared, for each is not. It but was and is gone. Each is but the ripple on the waters. So know, O man, thou art the sea. Krishna, in his turn, as the preacher and creative center of popular Hinduism, awoke in the Swami a feeling which was scarcely second to his passionate personal adoration of Buddha. Compared to his many-sidedness, the sannyas of Buddha was almost a weakness. How wonderful was the Gita! Reading it as a boy, he would be stopped every now and then by some great sentence, which would go throbbing through his brain for days and nights. They who find pleasure and pain the same, heat and cold the same, friend and foe the same. And that description of the battle and from the Gita, a spirited battle too, with the opening words of Krishna, Isle doth it befit thee, Arjuna, thus to yield to unmanliness. How strong! But besides this, there was the beauty of it. The Gita, after the Buddhist writings, was such a relief. Buddha had constantly said, I am for the people. And they had crushed in his name the vanity of art and learning. The great mistake committed by Buddhism lay in the destruction of the old. For the Buddhist books were torture to read. Having been written for the ignorant, one would find only 1 or 2 thoughts in a huge volume. And it is not to be supposed that the Swami here referred to the Dhammapada, a work which he always placed on the level with the Gita. It was to meet the need thus roused that the Puranas were intended. There had been only one mind in India that had foreseen this need, that of Krishna, probably the greatest man who ever lived. He recognizes at once the need of the people and the desirability of preserving all that had already been gained. Nor are the Gopi story and the Gita, which speaks again and again of women and Shudras, the only forms in which he reached the ignorant. For the whole Mahabharata is his, carried out by his worshippers, and it begins with the declaration that it is for the people. Life reveals God. Thus is created a religion that ends in the worship of Vishnu as the preservation and enjoyment of life, leading to the realization of God. Our last movement, Chaitanyism, you remember, was for enjoyment. The Swami was characterizing doctrine here. He was not speaking of the personal asceticism of Sri Chaitanya, which has probably never been surpassed. At the same time, Jainism represents the other extreme, the slow destruction of the body by self-torture. Hence, Buddhism, you see, is reformed Jainism. And this is the real meaning of Buddha's leaving the company of the 5 ascetics. In India, in every age, there is a cycle of sex, which represents every gradation of physical practice, from the extreme of self-torture to the extreme of excess. And during the same period will always be developed a metaphysical cycle, which represents the realization of God as taking place by every gradation of means, from that of using the senses as an instrument to that of the annihilation of the senses. Thus, Hinduism always consists, as it were, of 2 counter spirals completing each other round a single axis. As the Swami said, yes, Vaishnavism says it is all right, this tremendous love for father and mother, brother and husband and child. It is all right if only you think that Krishna is the child, and when you give him food that you are feeding Krishna. This was the cry of Chaitanya. Worship God through the senses. As against the Vedantic cry, control the senses, suppress the senses. At the present moment, we may see 3 different positions of the national religion: the Orthodox, the Arya Samaj, and the Brahmo Samaj. The Orthodox covers the ground taken by the Vedic Hindus of the Mahabharata epoch. The Arya Samaj corresponds with Jainism, and the Brahmo Samaj with the Buddhists. I see that India is a young and living organism. Europe also is young and living. Neither has arrived at such a stage of development that we can safely criticize its institutions. They are 2 great experiments, neither of which is yet complete. In India, we have social communism with the light of Advaita, that is, spiritual individualism, playing on and around it. In Europe, you are socially individualists, but your thought is dualistic, which is spiritual communism. Thus, the one consists of socialist institutions, hedged in by individualistic thought, while the other is made up of the individualist institutions within the hedge of communistic thought. Now we must help the Indian experiment as it is. Movements which do not attempt to help things as they are from that point of view no good. In Europe, for instance, I respect marriage as highly as non-marriage. Never forget that a man is made great and perfect as much by his faults as by his virtues. So we must not seek to rob a nation of its character, even if it could be proved that that character was all false. The worship of humanity. His mind was extraordinarily clear on the subject of what he meant by individualism. How often has he said to me, "You do not yet understand India. We Indians are man worshippers after all. Our God is man." He meant here the great individual man, a man of self-realization, Buddha, Krishna, the Guru, the Mahapurusha. But on another occasion, using the same word in an entirely different sense, he said, "This idea of man worship exists in nucleus in India, but it has never been expanded. You must develop it. Make poetry and art of it. Establish the worship of the feet of the beggars, as you had it in medieval Europe. Make man worshippers." He was equally clear again about the value of the image when he said, "You may always say that the image is God. The error you have to avoid is to think God the image." He was appealed to on one occasion to condemn the fetishism of the Hottentot. "I do not know what fetishism is." A lurid picture was hastily put before him of the object alternately worshipped, beaten, and thanked, and he exclaimed, "I do that. Don't you see?" He went on a moment later in a hot resentment of injustice done to the lowly and absent. "Don't you see that there is no fetishism? Oh, your hearts are steel that you cannot see that the child is right. The child sees person everywhere. Knowledge robs us of the child's vision, but at last, through higher knowledge, we win back to it. He connects a living power with rocks and sticks and trees and the rest. And is there not a living power behind them? It is symbolism, not fetishism. Can't you see it?" But while every sincere word was thus sacred to him, he never forgot for a moment the importance of the philosophy of Hinduism, and he would throw perpetual flashes of poetry into the illustration of such arguments as are known to lawyers. How lovingly he would dwell upon the Mimamsaka philosophy. With that pride, he would remind the listener that according to Hindu savants, the whole universe is only the meaning of words. After the word comes the thing. Therefore, the idea is all. And indeed, as he expounded it, the daring of the Mimamsaka argument, the fearlessness of its admissions, and the firmness of its inferences appeared as the very glory of Hinduism. There is assuredly no evasion of the logical issue in a people who can say, even while they worship the image, that the image is nothing but the idea made objective, that prayer is powerful in proportion to the concentration it represents, that the gods exist only in the mind, and yet the more assuredly exist. The whole train of thought sounded like the most destructive attack of the iconoclast, yet it was being used for the exposition of a faith. One day he told the story of Satyabhama's sacrifice and how the word Krishna, written on a piece of paper and thrown into the balances, made Krishna himself, on the other side, kick the beam. He began, "Orthodox Hinduism makes Shruti, the sound, everything. The thing is but a feeble manifestation of the pre-existing and eternal idea. So the name of God is everything. God himself is merely the objectification of that idea in the eternal mind. Your own name is infinitely more perfect than the person you. The name of God is greater than God. So guard your speech." Surely there has never been another religious system so fearless of truth. As he talked, one saw that the whole turned on the unspoken conviction. self-apparent to the Oriental mind, that religion is not a creed but an experience, a process, as the Swami himself has elsewhere said, of being and becoming. If it be true that this process leads inevitably from the apprehension of the manifold to the realization of the one, then it must also be true that everything is in the mind, and that the material is nothing more than the concretizing of ideas. Thus, the Greek philosophy of Plato is included within the Hindu philosophy of the Mimamsakas, and a doctrine that sounds merely empiric on the lips of Europe finds reason and necessity on those of India. In the same way as one declaring a truth self-evident, he exclaimed on one occasion, "I would not worship even the Greek gods, for they were separate from humanity. Only those should be worshipped who are like ourselves, but greater. The difference between the gods and me must be a difference only of degree." But his references to philosophy did not by any means always consist of these Epicurean titbits. He was merciless, as a rule, in the demand for intellectual effort, and would hold a group of unlearned listeners through an analysis of early systems for a couple of hours at a stretch, without suspecting them of weariness or difficulty. It was evident, too, at such times that his mind was following the train of argument in another language, for his translations of technical terms would vary from time to time. In this way, he would run over the 6 objects with which the mind has to deal in making up the universe according to the Vaisheshik formulation. These were substance, quality, action, togetherness, classification or differentiation, and inseparable inherence as between the cause and effect, parts, and the whole. With this, he would compare the 5 categories of Buddhism, of form and feeling, consciousness and reaction, or the resultant of all previous impressions, and vidya, or judgment. The Buddhists made form the resultant of all the others, and nothing by itself. The goal, therefore, for Buddhism was beyond vidya, which Buddhism called prajna, and outside the 5 categories. Side by side with this, he would place the 3 elusive categories of Vedanta: time, space, and causation, appearing as name and form, which is Maya, that is to say, neither existence nor non-existence. It was clear then that the scene was not, according to this, a being. Rather, is it an eternal, changeless process. Being is one, but process makes this being appear as many. Evolution and involution are both alike in Maya. They are certainly not in being or sat, which remains eternally the same. Nor would Western speculations pass forgotten in this great restoration of the path the race had come by. For this was a mind which saw only the seeking, pursuing inquiry of man, making no arbitrary distinctions as between ancient and modern. The analysis of the modern syllogism, under the old Indian title of the 5 limbs of the argument, would be followed by the 4 proofs of the Yayas. These were direct perception, inference, analogy, testimony. According to this logic, the induction and deduction of the moderns were not recognized. Inference was regarded as always from the more known to the less known, or from the less to the more. The inference from direct perception was divided into 3 different kinds. First, that in which the effect is inferred from the cause. Second, that in which the cause is inferred from the effect. And thirdly, the case in which inference is determined by concomitant circumstances, Methods of inference, again, were fivefold: by agreement, by difference, by double method of agreement and difference, by partial method of agreement, and by method of difference. The last two were sometimes classed together as the method of the residuum. It was quite clear that only the third of these could furnish a perfect inference. That is to say, proof is only complete when the negative has been proved as well as the affirmative. Thus, God can never be proved to be the cause of the universe. As he said, there is again the fact of pervasiveness. A stone falls and crushes a worm. Hence we infer that all stones falling crush worms. Why do we thus immediately reapply a perception? Experience, says someone, but it happens, let us suppose, for the first time. Throw a baby into the air and it cries. Experience from past lives, but why applied to the future? Because there is a real connection between certain things, a pervasiveness, only it lies with us to see that the quality neither overlaps nor falls short of the instance. On this discrimination depends all human knowledge. With regard to fallacies, it must be remembered that direct perception itself can only be a proof, provided the instrument, the method, and the persistence of the perception are all maintained pure. Dis-ease or emotion will have the effect of disturbing the observation. Therefore, direct perception itself is but a mode of inference, and therefore all human knowledge is uncertain, unknowable, and may be erroneous. Who is a true witness? He is a true witness to whom the thing said is a direct perception. Therefore the Vedas are true, because they consist of the evidence of competent persons. But is this power of perception peculiar to any? It is not. The Rishi, the Aryan, and the Lectra all alike have it. Modern Bengal holds that evidence is only a special case of direct perception, and that analogy and parity of reasoning are only bad inferences. Therefore, of actual proofs, there are only two: direct perception and inference. One set of persons, you see, gives priority to the external manifestation, and the other to the internal idea. Which is prior, the bird to the egg, or the egg to the bird? Does the oil hold the cup, or the cup the oil? This is a problem of which there is no solution. So give it up. Escape from Maya,